Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Kinship Care 101, an introduction to Kinship Care in New York State. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to orient everyone to the WebEx system so you know how to participate in today's event. If you have not done so already, please call into the webinar using the audio conference information found in the Event Info tab above the slide deck. Upon joining the webinar, you will be placed on mute to avoid background noises that may distract others from listening to the webinar. If you come across any technical issues during the webinar, please chat to the host who will be able to assist you. You will have the opportunity to submit questions today by typing into the chat box located on the right side of your screen. Click the dialog bubble on the bottom of your screen to open the chat box. Please chat your questions to the host phone. To ensure we are able to get to answer as many questions as possible, you may send in your questions at any point during the webinar, and we will address them during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Within the next week, a recording of today's webinar along with the slides will be posted on the CTAC website. Find the tab Upcoming Events and navigate to today's date where you will find a link to the page of this event. I am Geraldine Burton, and I will be facilitating the webinar, and I am with the Community Technical Assistance Center, CTAC. At this time, we will have our presenters introduce themselves.
Hi, let me see, well, got to give me the ball. I need the ball. Okay. Hi, this is Jerry Wallace. I'm the Senior Director at the New York State Kinship Navigator.
Hi, my name is Ray Glazer. I am the Co-Director at the New York State Kinship Navigator.
We're going to start by just introducing ourselves a little more and then getting onto the slides. I want to tell the host here that my slide deck is not moving on screen, and they're going to have to give me some assistance to know why it's not going up and down. Why can't I get these slides to move? Maybe I can now. Yeah.
Hi, Jerry. It's the small arrows on the left of the screen, or page up, page down on your keyboard.
Yeah, I'm doing page up, page down. Nothing.
The actual page up, page down, not the arrow keys.
Page down. All right, let's try this. All right. Yeah, I can do it now. I'm sorry. So, folks, let me begin again. I'm sorry for the interruption there. I'm the Senior Director at the Kinship Navigator. My background, very quickly, don't want to waste time on it, is that I'm an attorney. I've been doing kinship law since the late 1990s, and that's a long time ago now, and it means that I've seen a lot of changes in kinship care. We're going to be going through a bunch of slides, and in the course of that, I will mention a little of the advocacy and some of the laws that we've helped changed here. It's kind of tidbits that you'll get at the future webinars in more depth. But Ray, just introduce yourself and we'll get started, okay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ray Glazer. As I said earlier, I'm the Co-Director for the New York State Kinship Navigator. I've been with the program for 13 years since Jerry began it in 2006. And what I'm going to be doing today is talking a little bit about the kinship services in New York, as well as a very shallow dive into the financial assistance available for kinship caregivers. With that, I'll turn it over to Jerry to begin.
Yeah, right. The slide here says upcoming kinship webinars. This is part of a series. We're going to have 2 other webinars here. You see the dates. Financial assistance is a key issue for the kinship community, as is their legal options and understanding all the host of issues associated. We're going to get a little into that today, and then if you'll stay tuned for the other webinars, it'll really have a lot more depth, okay? The presentation, which I just slid by, this is what we're doing today. The first 4 bullets outline what we hope to show you. One is to really identify who these families are, talk a little bit about them, the causes, the circumstances surrounding kinship care, then talk about supportive services. This is really key because their supportive services are a lot of what the Navigator does for them and what their benefits are, helping them to get benefits. We are a Navigator system. Then I'll come back and talk about custodial arrangements and some of the unknowns there and maybe solve some problems for you. And then lastly, we're going to pitch you some outreach and hope that you'll help us connect to this community. So beginning at the very beginning, what is kinship care? I guess the first thing to say is kinship care is a term that's not universally known. It really comes out of the child welfare world. It's been around since the 1980s. We are called the Kinship Navigator, and there are kinship programs in New York State. And kinship care, as you can see in the first definition, really it's non-parent relatives and fictive kin, and that's a term of art in the literature. Grandparents, other relatives, fictive kin, or non-relatives with family connections who provide full-time care of children in their homes. The thing to note is that it means the parents are not in the home. They've taken on acting as the parents. When we say care, it really is they're substituting for the parents. There's a couple of other definitions on this page. You can peruse them for a minute, but I'm going to go on because I'm worried about time. Why do children end up in kinship care? These are the major causes. Ray is going to mention later a demonstration project we did for the federal government, and we had the Center for Human Services Research in New York looking at kinship caregivers in upstate, and their reasons for care mirror what you're seeing here. But in our over 15,000 or so individuals that have called the Navigator, in our experience in that federal project, it really is drugs and alcohol, substance abuse that drive what's going on. Obviously, substance abuse can be associated with incarceration. It can be associated with abuse, more predominantly with neglect. Certainly, there are instances when people pass away. There's military deployment is really a very minor issue. Substance abuse is often code for mental health issues, but this whole panoply is what causes children to come live with relatives. Okay. So how many children are living with relatives? Well, it's a lot, and if you think about it, census data or any kind of statistical gathering is always a snapshot in time. It's what's happening at a given instance. But in America, in the course of our child's childhood, there's a 1 in 11 chance that every child in America will live with a relative. Think Auntie M and Dorothy. Oh, Auntie M, there's no place like home. And in the African American community and minorities, those numbers even are more stark. 1 in 5 African American Black children will live in a kinship home. There are a lot of reasons for that, and historical and related to poverty and drug use, but it's a sad fact that many, many children will live with relatives. Indeed, if you're on the line and you think for a minute, I am sure you can think of someone in your family or a friend who's raising children that aren't theirs, okay? Average ages, you can see at the bottom, most come pretty young, and that means that lots of special issues for older caregivers caring for the very young, and we'll touch on that as we go forward. So in New York, we estimate, based on census data and other national statistical databases, that 193,000 children are living with relatives. That's quite a bit, but how many of them are in foster care? You know, usually you kind of synonymously associate kinship care with foster care. Well, while many of them have had contact with CPS, look at the number here, over 50%. There's been investigations. Sometimes there's removals. Sometimes there are not. That's what a safety plan is. We'll talk to that later. But the fact of the matter is, on this slide, you see the actual OCFS is the Office for Children and Family Services, our state child welfare agency. And this is their latest data available on the number of children in foster care, newly admitted on this chart. The column on the left, upstate, 4,621. New York City, 4,003.14. Then look at the number who are approved or certified in foster care. In upstate, just 548 in that year, and 1,432 in the city, for a total just under 2,000. And then there's something called direct custody, which gets a lot more use upstate. You can see 1,742. We'll talk about that. And then there's numbers going into KinGAP. But the big thing to pull away from this little chart is that we had less than 2,000 children go into kinship foster care in the past, in 2017. And the reality is that less than 4,500 children are in kinship foster care in New York State. So just think of the math here. 193,000 children living with relatives, less than 4,500 of them are in foster care. All these families are out there on their own. That's the population that we serve. We thought we'd give you a typical caregiver call. And yes, maternal grandmothers do a lot of the care here. Something like 55 to 65% of it is grandmas. And that's their average age, 56. Couple of children, one or two, are usually living in the home. And some of the reasons we alluded to already, incarceration, drug use. Now, here we get a little bit more into the pathway into grandma's house. And oftentimes, as we said, Child Protective Services was involved. Oftentimes, they'll go and talk to the parent, find the home unsafe. There may be grounds for removal. There may not be. But the suggestion is made that the child should go temporarily live with grandma, and that happens. Once they do that, and if they come to grandma's house on their own through a family arrangement or some other unfortunate circumstance, they become kinship caregivers in the informal kinship community. Once they get in that situation, they're likely to call us, and we're going to hear from them, and we have the immediate issues around something unexpected that has happened to the caregiver. There they go. They now have a new family, and they have children, oftentimes, as we've seen, very young children. And they have to look at, what am I going to do about getting diapers? What am I going to do about getting this child into daycare? I have to go to work. What am I going to do long term? I've got health issues. They're parenting again. They may not understand what that means and what the rules are that have changed in parenting. And it's a shock to have a 2-year-old in your home if you're 56. They've got to deal with children that have lost their parents. That's the least maybe of the tragedies that have happened to them. They can be neglect and abuse. There can be scenes that they've witnessed that are just horrific. And then the caregivers themselves, obviously unprepared, obviously trying to stabilize the family, and they have to a host of questions: financial stability, legal issues, and in the background, because most of them are maternal grandmothers, they wonder if they've done something wrong. I'm going to turn it over to Ray now, and she'll talk about outcomes for children and take the next slides. Ray? There you go.
All right, I'm here, Chair. You got to just give me the thank you.
I gave it to you, I thought, right?
All right. So let's talk a little bit about outcomes for children in kinship care. As Jerry discussed, there's a lot of adversary that kinship children face. They've got a lot of adverse childhood experiences. They come into the home. They've not come in from a happy spot to be in a kinship placement. Regardless of that fact, we find that when kids are placed with kin, they have more placement stability and they have better permanency outcomes. If we think about when we were children, if something happened to our parents and we could not reside in the home with them, in most instances, it would be much better for us to reside with somebody that's familiar to us, whether it's a relative or a family friend. So we found that studies show that children thrive when being placed with relative caregivers as opposed to foster care with strangers. Not that there's anything wrong with stranger foster care, but when kids are placed with kin, they tend to stay in the placement for a longer period of time. They tend to have better permanency, and they tend to have better stability. So we've given an overview of what a kinship caregiver looks like. Now let's take a look and see what types of services are available to these caregivers in New York. So New York State is a pretty big state, and I'm going to go back and forth with the next two slides because they're very interchangeable. You can see on this slide here we have a map of New York State. There's 62 counties that are in New York State, very diverse. And across the state, we have several different agencies that can assist these caregivers. There are what is called kinship programs, local kinship programs. There are currently 19 programs serving 21 counties in New York State. As you can see on this slide, some of these counties are marked in purple. The ones that are marked in purple are the ones that have a current program that is served. The only one that's an outlier is down in Ulster County. That program was recently taken out of state funding. So the rest of these counties all have a local kinship program that's run by some type of voluntary agency like Catholic Charities or Cornell Cooperative Extension, where they have kinship case managers on staff that can assist families with their most pressing needs. They run support groups. They can assist with getting financial assistance, understanding legal options, day-to-day things such as the need for diapers or clothing or finding childcare. You see in the map, though, that there's a lot of white area. So there's a lot of counties that do not have these funded programs. There are other programs that are funded by the Office of Children and Family Services called Permanency Resource Centers. Those fund caregivers that are post-guardianship and post-adoptive kinship caregivers. Jerry's going to go through legal options for caregivers, so you'll understand a little bit more about that. But just to let you know, that's a very small amount of caregivers. Most caregivers are informally caring for children. There are other small local programs run through the Office of Aging, grassroots support groups. In the Finger Lakes, some of the Hillside will run some small support groups that are very small funded. But there are not a lot of overarching kinship programs that serve the majority of New York State. So this is where the New York State Kinship Navigator comes into play. Our program is funded to serve all 62 counties in New York State. We are funded by the Office of Children and Family Services. We run a helpline for kinship caregivers that's manned 10 to 4 Monday through Friday, where we can assist caregivers over the phone to help them understand their options, their legal options, their financial options, where they can go to get assistance if there's an on-site program to direct them to. Our Kinship Navigators are available via phone. We're also available via email, and we have an online chat feature on our website where professionals and prospective caregivers as well as caregivers can go to speak with a Kinship Navigator. That is one of our components of our program. We also have specific counties that are dedicated to something called virtual case management, which we'll discuss a little bit later. We are able to assist caregivers on a one-on-one basis in specific counties with virtual case management and get a little bit more in-depth to meet their needs. We also provide education services across the state. We have local and statewide presentations. We have online video archive for caregivers to learn a little bit more about services that are available to them, mostly financial assistance. We also educate in terms of legislation, kinship policy across the state, and we can provide advocacy on a case-by-case basis. There's a lot that's involved to our program, but our main concept is to provide a gateway for caregivers to come to us, to call our helpline, to email us, or to go online and chat with our Kinship Navigators, and we treat each case on a one-by-one basis to try to investigate, to figure out how to link a caregiver or professional or prospective caregiver to the services that they need. So as I said, we are the only OCFS resource that serves all kinship families in 41 counties in New York State. We are not limited by the type of caregiver to serve, so we can serve custodians, we serve guardians, we serve caregivers that do not have any formal written designation whatsoever. Our primary purpose is family stability. We are not associated with the Department of Social Services or Family Court. So one of our best natures is that we do not have a stake in the game when a caregiver calls us. We can direct them and we can educate them from a very unbiased perspective. And really, we just want to educate them and let them know all of their options. So we want to make sure that caregivers are fully informed. We want to connect them to all available resources that they can have. And we do partner with voluntary agencies across the state as well as local departments of social services to ensure that caregivers can be connected to us to get all of the information that they need. This is a snapshot of our website, www.nysnavigator.org. On our website, we have a clickable map of all of the counties in New York State. So if you're looking for specific resources, you can click on the county, find out what kinship resources are available, legal resources, county resources, aging, and youth. We also have over 50 cited legal fact sheets on our website where we talk about the most common issues that caregivers face, mostly pertaining to financial assistance, legal options, how to enroll a child into school, birth certificates, things of that nature. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there is an online chat with a live agent now icon on the screen between 10 and 4 Monday through Friday. You can chat with a Kinship Navigator live. We find a lot of professionals really like this feature because they can just hop on and ask a quick question they have for a client or for themselves. So as I discussed before, we have a helpline that is our main feature of our program, 877-454-6463. We're available Monday through Friday. We answer 95% of our calls live, and if we miss a call, we will return it right away. We are available to do an intake in 37 different languages as we partner with Catholic Family Center in Rochester, New York, who provides interpreter services. And we provide comprehensive intakes and database, which means that when a client calls, we will take all the information that they're willing to give us in order to direct them in the best possible manner. And then if they call us back again, they're already in our system, so whoever answers the phone can look them up in our database and provide ongoing assistance without having to do an intake all over again. So when caregivers call us, they have two main questions. The biggest concerns that they have, as Jerry alluded to, is how am I going to afford this child in my care? So if the average caregiver is 56 years old and they take in a 2-year-old, they are probably not prepared to provide for that child. I'm going to give a very brief overview on the financial assistance for caregivers, and then I'm going to encourage everybody that's got an interest in this to attend our February 11th webinar because we're going to be going through all of these in detail. So the main form of financial assistance for caregivers is something called the non-parent grant. Non-parent grant is run through the Department of Social Services. It is temporary assistance for the child in the care of a caregiver. In New York State, you are not fiscally responsible for a child unless you have given birth to it or you have adopted it. So what we are looking at here is the child is applying for financial assistance, which is why it's called the child-only grant, because they only look at the child's income. I don't want to take too much time reviewing this. When we discuss it on February 11th, I will walk through all the parameters on how to apply for it, who is eligible for it, and what some of the barriers are. But most kinship caregivers are eligible for this grant unless the child is receiving an income in excess of $400 per month. Most of those incomes would come from child support, Social Security disability, Social Security survivors benefits, or if the biological parent is still in the home. Additional benefits that come from the public assistance grant are Medicaid, one-time summer camp fees per year, the possibility of child care, and some caregivers that are eligible based on their household income can apply for SNAP as well as HEAP. Other financial assistance that's available to kinship caregivers may be foster care maintenance payments if the kinship caregiver has become a certified foster parent. Something called the KinGAP subsidy, the Kinship Guardianship Assistance Program. That's another form of payment where the caregiver has been certified as a foster parent, has transitioned to kinship guardianship, and is available to get that subsidy. the adoption subsidy for children that are hard to place in adoption, supplemental security income, which would be retirement benefits off of the grandparent, and then Social Security disability, which the child would qualify for based on the fact if they have a disability or not, and Social Security dependent survivor benefits if one or both of the parents are deceased. We're going to go through all of these in a very detailed manner on the February 11th webinar. And I just want to answer the question that's come up in the chat box as I've been discussing. If a social worker wants to refer a kinship parent to our services, there are two ways to do so. One is via our helpline, 877-454-6463. And then there is another method called our permission to contact form, which I'm going to be going through very briefly after I turn the ball over to Jerry to discuss kinship legal issues. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jerry so that he can talk a little bit about our other pressing need that our caregivers find, which is kinship legal assistance.
Right, thanks very much. That was terrific. As Ray alluded to the upcoming webinar on benefits, there also is one on March 3rd on legal options for kinship caregivers. So this is just a smattering of what that will be like. So kinship legal issues. Well, the first thing is becoming a caregiver, and then we'll talk about when you are a caregiver. Becoming a caregiver can become caregivers in many different routes. Here in the first bullet, we talk about informal custody. That means you've never gone to court. Somehow or another, you've got the child in your home, and you don't want to go to get an order of custody or guardianship, perhaps because you have an acrimonious relationship with the parent, or you just haven't had time to do it yet. What does the law say about you, and are you a lawful custodian? Yes, you are, and the law says a lot about you, and that's part of the upcoming lecture. But certainly you can become a caregiver without going to court. If you go to court, private custody and guardianship is the common orders that you're seeking, and you go to family court for both of them. Now, when you go, we'll talk to you later about the distinction between the two. I told you early on that I got interested in this subject of kinship care back in the 90s. One of the first things I did was a survey to judges across the state and law guardians, asking them what was the difference between legal custody and legal guardianship. And frankly, hardly anybody understands it. Stay tuned to March 3rd and we'll explain all of that for you. Now, if you go to court and you petition to become a custodian or a guardian, either one, they're separate procedures. If you have the parents' consent, the judge will want to see that in your papers and probably will want the parents to be notified and come in and verbally offer their consent to the judge or he or her. And that's great, because if that's what the family wants and the judge doesn't see anything awry, they may not even do an investigation. You may be able to walk out of there with a verbal order of custody to be followed up by written orders later on. If the parent will not consent, then the game is afoot, because you're going to go in and have to allege in your papers something called an extraordinary circumstance. And those are usual saying in the papers the parents are unfit because they do drugs, or they're mentally ill, or they're not available to care for the child, or they're neglecting them. And you're going to have to then wait for a hearing to be held so the judge can look into that and see whether your allegations have any merit. So you will not get to become a custodian or guardian against a parent who is not consenting unless you can lower the bar of protections for them by showing that they are basically unfit. The only other circumstance that could be an extraordinary circumstance that would lower that bar is if you have already assumed care for a significant period of time. There's statutes on this and this case law on it, and we'll go into that at the March 3rd event, okay? Now, this is the normal ways in which you assume care, but how the child comes into your care, we've said earlier, many of these children have child protective services investigations. It's not always the case, but if CPS has been involved and they come and go look at the parent's home, even if there's grounds for removal, they may suggest for the child to go live with a relative temporarily. That is called a safety plan commonly. Officially, it's an alternative living arrangement. Once the caregiver assumes care, she's an informal custodian, and she then has to consider whether she wants to go forward with that status or go to court and become a guardian or a legal custodian. Now, if on the other hand, CPS investigates and decides to remove, then they open up what is called an Article 10 proceeding, which is an abuse or neglect proceeding against the parent. And it's important for them, and the statutes say that they need to look for relatives, including all the grandparents, and tell them their options for caregiving. A lot of things can happen right or wrong during that kind of procedure and that search. And we hear about caregivers who don't get told their options or partially learn what they should be doing. And one of the things we do is make sure that they learn all their options. Now, if you've had a child diverted into your care without a removal and learning your options, there are also some remedies because the law may not be have been followed. And we have fact sheets on those different diversion problems and diversion solutions remedies. Once you become a caregiver, these bullets show you the different legal statuses that you have. And I've mentioned informal custody. There's really a couple of types of informal custody. One is that there are some statutes that tell you what you can do, what authority you have, and what rights you have to a child if you've never been to court. There are also opportunities for the parent to perform a parental power of attorney and give you certain powers. If you've been to court, obviously you become a legal custodian or guardian. If there's been a removal and an abuse or neglect proceeding, you may have the child placed with you in what's called a direct custody, which is not foster care. It is kind of foster care without all the bells and whistles and all the advantages of foster care. Then you could, if there's been a removal, become the foster parent of a child. And if you become the foster parent of a child, as Ray said earlier, eventually can be eligible for leaving foster care, becoming the guardian of that child with a subsidy, and that's called the KinGAP program. Lastly, sometimes relatives on their own, sometimes at the far end of the neglect and abuse proceeding, may wind up an adoption situation where the parents are going to lose their rights and the caregiver is going to adopt. If you go through the neglect and abuse, that adoption could have a subsidy. If you do it independently in a private adoption, you will not get that subsidy. And by the way, if you become the adoptive parent, you then are a real parent of that child, and you no longer will qualify for that child-only grant, because the other eligible criteria is you must be a non-parent, and now you are the parent. So we see situations where younger caregivers adopt and then lose that financial assistance. Not a good idea. Legal elements of care. When I do the legal options lecture on this, these are the different situations we'll go through. And we chart all this out so that we have, of course, the top of the page, these 5 different legal elements, and then we go through, on the left-hand side, every one of the custodial arrangements, and you marry them up and you talk about them. So the first one is recognition. Easy to recognize a legal custodian and a legal guardian, not so easy to recognize an informal custodian, because that's not really a term of art in the law. There's all sorts of different ways statutes and regulations and common law and case law talk about them. I'll just give you a few to help your head spin. De facto custodian, in loco parentis, person upon whom a child is dependent for care, person who is acting as a parent, and the list just goes on. They're all kind of descriptive, and it makes it hard to find out what the law says about those folks. Don't worry, you don't need to know, we know. Okay. Regarding authority, that's the second big issue. Depending on the legal situation, What authority do you have? Well, we talk about schooling. You often hear talk about school enrollment, but actually responsibility for schooling, attendance at school, signing that, yes, Johnny can go on the day trip, is a different area of the law than school enrollment. School enrollment is very problematic. You need to prove residency with the intent to remain and that you've assumed care and control. We handle a lot of issues on school enrollment and have a dialogue with the state education department about this, and a lot more could be said. Medical care, there's 4 different types of medical care, as you see here on the bullet, and routine and major are the ones that are more problematic. Certain legal statuses will not allow you to do routine care, and certain ones will not allow you to do major. We would talk to the differences of all those. And then records. Here's just a smattering of some of the types of records that you want to get. We're calling birth certificates records, Social Security cards, passports, health and medical records. The law is different for each one of these. Depending on the legal arrangement that you have, you may have access or you may not have access. A big issue for caregivers is their security interest. And by that we mean, I've got the kid, can I keep him? Or her, sorry. And that's an issue that is getting into real legal issues, and we have helped draft laws in New York State on this and are experts on the conditions associated with that and what needs to be proven and what your chances are. And we also try, in this area, reach out and find attorneys for people. It's a common request, I need legal assistance. There's not much legal help out there. And for poor caregivers, it's a battle to get legal assistance. Financial, Ray talked about that, and as she mentioned, when she does her subsequent financial assistance lecture, you'll get into the weeds on how these different legal arrangements impact your eligibility for benefits. The good news in the big picture is the law is pretty generous on eligibility benefits, and most of the different legal statuses they're available to you. Resources, Ray talked about that. We have our specialized kinship resources, and there are other resources. They're just, in many domains, are just not enough resources. For instance, mental health is really needs a lot more to be done to help these caregivers and the children and their care given their circumstances. Kinship Navigator outreach. Ray's going to take over here, and I'm going to have to give her this little ball, so give us a second, and Ray will take on, okay?
Okay, everybody. So as you can tell from the last couple of minutes there, the financial assistance and the legal assistance are really, really very in-depth. So if you're able to, we really encourage you to attend the subsequent webinars on both, because there are so many nuances related to both of them that they really deserve their own webinar. But let's talk a little bit about how you can get families in contact with us. So we've discussed our helpline, which caregivers are always welcome to call, but we'd like to talk just for a couple of minutes about how you can get families through the Kinship Navigator in another venue that's been wildly successful for us. So back in 2012, the Navigator was funded through a federal demonstration project in order to collaborate with specific counties to see if we could get more caregivers through our door. One of the very important statistics that we'll talk about for the financial benefits webinar is that we found that out of all of the caregivers in New York State that are eligible for financial assistance, only 15% of caregivers actually know about these grants or know about the services available. And it's very sad to me as somebody that's covered our helpline when I get a call from a grandmother that says, I've had this child in my care for the last 8 years. Can you provide assistance to me? Well, I absolutely can, but unfortunately, those last 8 years that you've been caring for the child, we can't get retroactive assistance. So the bottom line really is that we want to get caregivers to the Navigator as soon as they are engaged in caring for a child. We want to make sure that they get information and education about everything that is available to them right up front. So a lot of caregivers are obviously going through quite a bit when they get children into their care. They probably have CPS involved. The children have been placed into their care. They have to make immediate decisions, and it's very overwhelming for them. So what we did is we partnered with 5 local departments of social services to see if we could get more caregivers in our door right away as soon as the children are placed with them. And the way that we looked to do that was to get something called a permission to contact form signed. So what this permission to contact form does is it makes it easier for kinship families to have contact and receive services from the Kinship Navigator. If you meet with a caregiver and you give them our business card or you give them our phone number, they may or may not call us. But if you are able to fill out a form with them and have that form faxed right to us, and you take the ball to get that caregiver to us and take the onus off of them, then it's much more likely that we're going to hear from this caregiver. We piloted this in 5 counties, Tioga, Broome, Orange, Dutchess, and Ulster over 3 years. And within that 3-year time period, we saw a 600% increase in our reach in those counties to caregivers, simply because they were facilitated referrals with the Human Services Agency to the Navigator. So our permission to contact form, which is right on our homepage on our website, it's in very big letters, permission to contact form, is simply a 1-page form back and front. On the front, it gives you a paragraph overview of what the Navigator is, that it's information, referral, education for kinship caregivers, and that we would like to speak with the caregiver to provide assistance. On the back, it asks the caregiver for permission for the Navigator to call them. It asks for some basic information from the caregiver about where they're residing, how to best get a hold of them, what language they prefer, what time they prefer contact. We are 10 to 4 Monday through Friday, but we are able to make calls before hours or after hours. If our 56-year-old caregiver probably has a full-time job, so a lot of caregivers appreciate an evening call, and our staff are able to do that. We can reach out to them via email, mail, home phone, or cell phone. And then the bottom, we ask for a little bit of information about the referring worker. So once a caregiver fills this out and signs it, and the worker sends this to the Navigator via fax, it comes in right into our Navigator email. Our Kinship Navigators check the email on an hourly basis. We will make a phone call to the caregiver within 2 business days at the time that they have allocated. If we're not successful reaching them, we will reach out to them 1 week later. If we're not successful the second time, we will send them an informational letter with our trifold that explains to them who referred them to the Navigator and who we are, and to encourage the caregiver to get in touch with us. This form, once it was implemented 8 years ago, has been wildly successful, and we've been able to replicate it across much of the state. This started out with Department of Social Services workers, but we've brought it to schools, we've brought it to pediatrician's office, we brought it to psychologists. Basically, anybody that comes in contact with a kinship caregiver, prospective kinship caregiver, can send this to us, and we will reach out and contact the caregiver. As I said, it is right on our homepage on our website. I believe that we can make it available with the handouts from this webinar. And if anybody's got an interest in getting more of these in quantity, first of all, they are printable. But if you'd like us to send them to you, our contact information is at the end of this presentation. You can email me, and I'm happy to send you either the file or send you forms via mail. So please feel free to use this. It's very easy. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill out, and it takes the onus right off of the caregiver and puts them in contact with us. Our regional navigators are another way to get the word out. In 2016, we started a pilot program to try to increase contact with communities and human services agencies. We've got 4 regions across the state. As we said in the very beginning, we are a statewide program. Jerry is located in Albany. I'm in Rochester. We have parts of our team in northern New York and western New York. So we've divided up the state, and we are able to give a greater breadth of resources for kinship families across the state by going out and educating human services agencies on what Kinship Care is, what the Navigator can do for families. We give this Kinship 101 presentation across the state. We also can do in-depth presentations on financial assistance, KinGap, legal assistance. We give a 3-hour CLE on kinship law. Basically anything that the community is interested in, we are able to present on. And on our staff right now, we have 6 on our team. We have 2 full-time Kinship Navigators that cover our helpline 10 to 4 Monday through Friday, but we are a very small team and everybody steps in to cover the entire state. As I said, right now we have 4 regional navigators. Their information will be a little bit later on the PowerPoint. I'm going to turn it back over to Jerry now to talk about the Family First Prevention Services Act and a little bit more about the services that we are providing for virtual case management.
I'm going to spend just a few minutes on these last slides and then make sure there's some time for Q&A. In 2018, the federal government passed a very important act for the foster care community and for the kinship community, the Family First Prevention Services Act. The only thing I'm going to note here is that the act funds Kinship Navigator programs with matching federal Title IV dollars. Those are child welfare dollars. However, they made it very difficult to qualify for those matching dollars. In fact, a year and a half later, well, 2 years later now, not one program has qualified yet for these dollars. You must do an evaluation, rigorous standards, evidence-based, and then if you can get past the clearinghouse review, you can qualify for the big bucks. So we were awarded by the State Office of Children and Family Services a sole source to try and qualify Kinship Navigator services for those federal dollars. That evaluation is an ongoing 3-year project. We're working with 2 different types of program actions. In the second bullet, you'll see the virtual kinship case assistance. All across the country, everyone would love to see an online Kinship Navigator qualify for federal dollars because we just can't have a real person in every community in the country. So virtual case assistance is our attempt to qualify for online help. It's similar to case management, but we just don't get to meet you. We're in these counties as part of the federal project: Saratoga, Warren, Washington, Onondaga, Albany, Schenectady, Rensselaer. We really need to get people into the evaluation. So while we're very successful at our outreach, it then has to go through the pipeline and qualify and complete the evaluation. If anyone is listening in those counties, please make a special effort to assist us in our outreach to reach more caregivers so that we can get that trickle down and get enough people in the evaluation end of this project. We also have a local kinship project where we're partnering with some of the local kinship programs and running peer support groups. And there you see Erie, Broome, Oswego, Dutchess, Queens, and Brooklyn. Once again, folks in is necessary. The more folks in, because getting to the evaluation completion is a long road. And the evaluators and us are working hard to get more folks into that project. But if you can help, it would be greatly appreciated. It will not only help the caregivers individually, but it will help them eventually help everybody by getting us funded. Summing up some of the things that we do, again, on a local level, we do these speaking engagements. We have go-to webinars, usually regularly on our website, and you'll see a list of them upcoming. We do these collaborative agreements. Here's who you can contact to be in touch with us. But that's the regional navigators. We're mentioned again at the end. One very special thing that we do is Kinship Care Month. We're promoting public recognition of Kinship Care, and we have gotten state and federal resolutions on this for many years now. We hold a big event in Albany. We had close to 180 people this year, and we had to turn folks away. It's a great day, and stay tuned to learn about that. If you're able to attend, we'd love to have you there. So please help us. Please get connected with us. You can join our coalition newsletter. We didn't talk about it today, but we advocate at the state level. Just this year, we got 3 laws passed, signed by the governor in December. Please use the permission to contact if at all possible. If not, please make referrals. Consider a local event for September is Kinship Care Month. We have materials and can help with that. And come on up to Albany in September. It's a great day. With that being said, the last slide I have here is questions in A. I'm turning it over to Geraldine, and we'll see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Ray and Jerry. Job well done. And at this time, I'm going to address a few of these questions. I have 2 questions. Child care and summer camps. One of my caregivers is having a hard time finding free child care over the weekends. Most caregivers are very interested in free summer camps, and most of their children have special needs. This is going to be addressed on the February 11th webinar, so please stay tuned for that. The next question, can a caregiver who is receiving a child-only grant, it was a direct placement, can she change to KinGap? There was an old ACS case with the birth parent.
Ray, should I give it a shot?
Yep, go right ahead.
Yeah. The prerequisite for KinGap, Kinship Guardianship Assistance Program, is that the caregiver is a certified or approved foster parent for the child. If the lady here, the caregiver, is a direct custodian, I'm assuming that applies to what is sometimes called an N docket or a 1017 placement. These are placements made with caregivers pursuant to abuse and neglect proceeding where they should have been offered the option to become a foster parent. Sometimes they're not really clear about it. Sometimes they're worried about the intrusion in their system, and sometimes they don't qualify. But regardless, if she is a direct custodian, there still is an opportunity to become a foster parent. She should be talking to her local child welfare worker and tell them she wants to go through the procedural steps to qualify as a foster parent, so that instead of being subject to just the small amount of money that she can get in the child-only grant, she could become a foster parent and eventually qualify to become a kinship guardian. Now, a kinship guardian with that subsidy is a great outcome. You only have to be in foster care for a short period of time. Statute says 6 months, but it's really more like a year. There are some other eligibility criteria that must be met, but she's welcome to call us and talk through that. We actually do trainings for local counties on the Kinship Guardianship Assistance Program, on the eligibility for that. And I'm actually later today, I'm talking to a county about their use of direct custody and how we can move folks from direct custody into foster care. I hope that helps. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How would one refer caregivers to evaluation?
I could take that, Jer.
Okay.
So if you've got a caregiver that you feel would benefit from the Kinship Navigator services or from this evaluation, which is an offshoot of our services, you can either have them call our helpline or you can have them fill out a permission to contact form and send it to us. With every caregiver that comes through our helpline, we're going to do a full intake, and if they are eligible for our evaluation, we will make sure that they are sent along to the evaluators to be part of the study.
And there are some incentives from the evaluators to participate in the study.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you clarify what is available to people that reside outside of the counties you reside in? For example, hotline, virtual case management, etc.
I can take that one as well, Chair. That's okay. So we service the entire state of New York for the Kinship Navigator. Everybody in New York State is entitled to access to our helpline and information, referral, and education. So anyone in New York can call our number or have a permission to contact form sent in. And our Kinship Navigators will assist them with what their needs are. If they reside in those specific counties that Jerry Wallace spoke about that have virtual case management, they will automatically be referred to a virtual case assistant. And if there's a local kinship service available to them, they will always be made aware of that for on-site case management services. And I actually to the next questions that's come in as well, because I think that this might be really helpful for everybody on the line. If you've got a caregiver that you are working with and you want to fill that permission to contact form out, and you are able to have them sign it, and then you can scan it and email it to us, that is perfectly fine. You can email it right to navigator@nysnavigator.org. It does not have to be faxed in. The most important thing is that that caregiver has filled the form out and signed it. So if it's easier for you to scan the form and email it directly to us, that is perfectly fine as well.
All right. Thank you. Next question. Can you get a child-only grant and the Kin Gap subsidy?
Ray, I'll do that one just so for
yep.
No, you cannot. You cannot get the Kin Gap subsidies expressly disallows getting the child-only grant. It's one or the other. The Kin Gap subsidy in general is the same amount you would get as a foster parent. So it can be significantly more. And if you have multiple children in the home, it really is going to make a difference. In general, the child-only grant is between $400 and $450 for one child. For the second child is $150, the third $150. It's a fraction. But in foster care payments and in Kin Gap payments, they are going to be double or triple. They're the same amount for each child. And if the child has special needs, they're even more. So getting into foster care and moving through to become a Kin Gap recipient is really valuable over time. And those payments will come with you once you leave foster care. You won't have the department looking over your shoulder, but you can continue to get those increased payments.
All right. Can a 1017 receive a child-only grant if the parent is staying in the home?
Ray, you want to do that? In general, no, but Ray might have some, there are some qualifiers about the parent in the home.
Yep, so that is actually going to be something that we're going to talk about on February 11th. As Jerry said, the general answer is no. If the parent is in the home, the caregiver is not eligible, but as is always the case with social services, there are gray areas. So I will be addressing those in depth on February 11th.
Okay. On your map where the program locations are highlighted in purple and those without is white, if we live in an area where a program is not located, are these kinship caregivers still eligible for assistance? For example, I live in Cattaraugus County and run a kinship caregiver support program in Allegheny County. Neither of those counties are highlighted as a location spot.
I can take that one. So it's important to note that the map that we showed you, the highlighted counties are the ones that have on-site kinship services that provide kinship management that are funded by the Office of Children and Family Services. So again, our entire state is eligible for Kinship Navigator services. And when a caregiver calls us from any county in the state, we provide intake, we provide information, we provide referral and education. On a side note, whoever asked that question, if they have a kinship caregiver support program in Allegheny County, I'm most interested in hearing about it because I don't think that I do know about it. So if you're willing to email me at rglazer@cfcrochester.org, I would love to make sure that we have information about your program on our site. Because if we get a caregiver that's from Allegheny County, I want to make sure that they're aware of your support program.
Yeah, and one more comment, Ray, of course, knows we list services by every county on our website. And we have services that are not OCFS funded in many counties. So go to the particular county to look, and you will see sometimes kinship programs, even though they're not an OCFS funded program. Rockland County has them. I think Cattaraugus has a program. And some others, yeah, and some other counties do, and they're going to be on our site. They're just not on. What we showed you in that map was the state-funded ones.
Yeah, as I said, there's many, many other small ones. Some are Office of Aging, some are very small support groups that are funded with just a few dollars. We highlight the ones that are funded by the Office of Children and Family Services, but whenever a caregiver calls us, we will always take a look at the resources that we have because our goal is to link them to on-site services whenever we possibly can. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Geraldine.
Thank you, Ray. Again, I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. When the webinar closes, you will see an opportunity to provide us with some brief feedback. Please take a couple of minutes to respond. It helps us meet your needs. Feel free to let us know if there are other aspects of this topic on which you would like additional information. If you have any other questions, please contact us at ctac.info@nyu.edu. And please don't forget about the upcoming kinship webinars. On February 11th, Tuesday, from 12:30 to 1:30, financial assistance for kinship caregivers. And then on Tuesday, March 3rd, legal options for kinship caregivers, 12:30 to 1:30. Again, thank you so much on behalf of CTAC and our presenters. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great day. Thank you again.